Hi, welcome or welcome back. My name is Brittany and it is time for a reading wrap up. I have read some things that got me fired up. I've read some Christmassy things lately and I just want to catch you up on what I've been reading before I forget. Let's start with my Christmassy based reads. That way if you are interested in something, you still have a little bit of time to check it out. The first thing I want to chat about is The Kingdom of Sweets, and this is by Erica Johansson. This is a really interesting Nutcracker retelling. This follows two sisters, Clara and Natasha, and one Christmas Eve when they were infants, Drosselmeyer came to their house. He's like not related to them in any way, shape, or form. It's just this like weird kind of powerful man in the town. He comes to their home and blesses one of them light and one of them dark, and visits the family every year on Christmas. When they're, I think, 18, they're teenagers, kind of close to entering society. Natasha, she is the dark sister, and Clara is the light sister. Drosselmeyer appears again. He gives Clara a ballerina, and she has announced who she's going to be betrothed to, which is actually Natasha's current love interest. And for Natasha, the dark one, he gives a nutcracker. The whole night just goes to hell when Natasha and Clara end up entering the Kingdom of Sweets. They meet the Sugar Plum Fairy. Clara gets lost and Natasha is searching for her, but we learn that the Sugar Plum Fairy is maybe not so sweet and nice. And from there, things just get a little wacky. This book is described as being a Nutcracker retelling, but I would say the Nutcracker themes and the retelling itself really stops about 1/3 to halfway through. We do visit a few Christmas Eves throughout the story. There is some of that lore still throughout, but really that halfway mark, the book just totally changed in tone and in plot, like what was actually happening. So there's definitely an emphasis on society and what's expected of young women, supporting the poor. The rich have too much. We learn more about the Sugar Plum Fairy and Drosselmeyer. They do have some history. There's a bit of a mystery aspect to this, figuring out what happened between the two, and the threats of the Sugar Plum Fairy do follow one of the sisters throughout her life. This book had me like at the beginning. I loved that just heavy Christmas Nutcracker stuff, learning about these two sisters. Natasha does not like Clara. Natasha is very jealous of her sister's appearance because she's shorter, she has dark hair, she's just described as maybe being frumpier, whereas Clara, the light sister, is tall and lean and ballerina, and they just look different, even though they're twins, because of Drosselmeyer's blessing. I don't know, it was a lot darker than I thought it was going to be, and I actually really liked that. There's a plot point that happened and I was shooketh. I did not expect that to happen. I was like, what did I just read? That's amazing. And it definitely had like a very grim component to this too. There is some hauntings that happen, which again, I was not expecting. Overall, like the story was fine. I think I just would have liked it to lean more into the Kingdom of Sweets and the Nutcracker lore more than where the story did go. However, I think if anything, I am excited to check out this author's backlist. Just with the tone of her story, the writing, there were some really interesting things she said and did within her story as well that I just think would be really cool to explore, because I know she writes some other fantasy. So if you are looking for some holiday reading, I would still recommend it, but just know that it maybe could be like a little more festive, but overall was an interesting time. The next kind of festive read is Krampus, and this is by Brom. I would say this was fun in that I got to learn more about Krampus and Yuletide. This actually is taking place in current day. So this follows Jesse, who is 26. He's kind of a down on his luck musician. Him and his wife have separated. They have a child together, and his wife has now moved in with Dillard, who is the police chief of Boone County. Dillard and the governor, or is it Dillard and the general, is another kind of prolific figure in the community, and they're just up to some dirty deeds, as there are in small towns, and Jesse finds himself in between the general and Dillard, and then also trying to get his wife away from Dillard. He's like, I promise, baby, like, I'm gonna make it big one more time, and she's like, you've had your chance, Jesse. Like the classic, right? One night, Jesse's life gets even more complicated when he sees Santa's sleigh like crash. It's attacked in the sky, and Santa's toy sack crashes into his mobile home. Jesse finds the toy sack and realizes he can pull out all the toys his daughter wanted, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna use these toys to get my baby back. But then he has not only Dillard and the general after him, he now has Santa looking for his toy sack, and Krampus has been imprisoned this whole time, but has been waiting for Santa to come to Boone County so he can have his Belsnickles steal Santa's sack and regain power, because it's technically Krampus's sack from Loki. So there's a bunch of lore, a bunch of pagan traditions and holidays and things that are discussed in this book to really bring to life this story and kind of this battle between Santa and Krampus. So at first I was just kind of like, about it. I don't love when there's fantastical elements and modern stories like meshed together. I want to be like in a fantasy world. Like it pulled me out a little bit to have like Krampus, who is this demon looking like creature, and like a ripped buff Santa Claus who is very godlike, and then like there's machine guns going off. Like that was a little strange, but overall it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, just with that setting in general. It was very interesting. It's quite dark. I'm excited to see how Brom writes other novels as well, especially Slewfoot and The Child Thief. It does make me interested in his writing. But yeah, just it was overall really interesting. I did look up in the back of the book, just kind of tells you more of this lore, but basically Krampus and Santa would go around together, and Santa would give toys to the children, and then Krampus would take the bad kids and like beat the shit out of them and put them in a Santa sack and like drag them to hell. And then Christianity got involved, and then they started, saying that Krampus was the devil. But there is a lot more to that, where Krampus and Yuletide really play into Mother Earth, and there were some really interesting moments about Krampus trying to get people to believe in him again, but you have all these teenagers who don't give a shit, and they're just on their phones, and he's like, hello, like, we're destroying the earth, you have to believe in me. And then he had been locked up and imprisoned for so long. When he sees the destruction of mankind, he's just so heartbroken. And like, even though he kills people in really brutal ways, Krampus is just kind of a big old softie and just wants people to like, join this holiday spirit and like give back to Mother Earth so she can provide for us. Like, it just was a very interesting experience. So I do recommend Krampus around Christmas time if you need just a light, festive holiday read. This next one was kind of an accidental find for this time of year, so I got this recommendation from Elliot Brooks, and it is Foul Days by Genovia Demova. This actually takes place over New Year's, so there is still time to pick this up. We are following our main character who lives in a village where every New Year, the veil between like good and bad, like heaven and hell, has shifted, and so for 12 days all of these various creatures and demons just run rampant. Chaos ensues, and so the townspeople know this happens every year, so they plan and prepare for the Foul Days. Our main character Kosara is a witch, and all of the witches have shadows, and that is their source of power, but their shadow can be given up willingly to someone else, and if that is done, then they slowly get like shadow sickness. They slowly start to lose like body parts. They like start to turn invisible and like see-through, and you like can't grab stuff or something until you eventually just like wither away and disappear. Kosara is quite efficient at her job as a witch and in the town of Chernigrad, which is where this is taking place. One evening, she finds herself in a bind and forfeits her shadow in order to get away from the Tsar of Monsters. She now finds herself on the other side of the wall. So we have the side where all the monsters come once a year to wreak havoc and kill people, and their whole town is separated by this giant wall, and she finds herself on the other side, and it's sunny and light, and people are thriving and wealthy, and there's no monsters. And so you learn more about both places, why there's this wall, the history of the monsters, and she finds herself in the middle of a murder investigation while also trying to track down her shadow. Her shadow sickness is setting in quick. I did like the monster lore. I thought that was really fun. I wish we would have gotten just a little bit more of it. We do spend a decent amount of time in the other city. I would have liked just more setting in Chernigrad, where we get to see the monsters and stuff. We do go back to that, but I just think getting some more setup with that and the witches would have been a little funner. The murder mystery was really interesting. Trying to figure out who's involved and who did what. I did like that part. There were times where the book felt youthful, and then it would just drop F-bombs, where I'm just like, Which one are we? Are we young adult or are we adult? Like, that always confuses me. But overall, I did really like this. I thought it was fun to read about, especially just with New Year's coming up. And this is actually a duology. The second book is out, so if you wanted to keep going, you have a completed series to pick up. Okay, so that kind of is just a few seasonal type things I read. Let's rant for a second. I have a few things that just got me fired up. It got me fired up, and I'm ready. The first book let's chat about, Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austin. It is definitely a character-based story about Enid navigating her early 20s with work, friendships, her love life, family. Her and her mom grew up together after her dad left. And then her dad married a new woman, had 3 daughters of his own, and when we meet everybody, he had recently passed away. So she's trying to navigate her mother and just take care of her mom in that way. And then she's also trying to have this relationship with her stepsisters, which is very interesting because they hadn't really had much contact, but is trying to form these relationships and doesn't know how to navigate it. She also is just in the middle of a romantic mess. So she's like dating this one woman and then realizes she's married, and the wife like comes to Enid's home and is like, "Were you sleeping with my wife?" And Enid's like, "Yeah, I guess, my bad." And then they get together. Like, what? Okay, first of all, what the hell? That's so messy, but whatever. So we just get to see Enid struggle with her family, her relationship, and work. Things progress for Enid to the point where she's becoming increasingly paranoid about bald men and that someone is breaking into her home. And that's really all it is. I think Enid will resonate for some people, but she just drove me absolutely bananas. And it was kind of a bummer because the first 100 pages I thought were really funny. It opened up with Enid listening to true crime at a grocery store. And if you enjoy true crime podcasts, like, I think you'd appreciate that humor as well. Just don't think I was a target audience for this one at all. I'm in my 30s, I have been to therapy many times, and it was very clear to me that Enid had never been to therapy, had never addressed anything. She spent so much of her time focusing on her mom to make sure her mom was okay, and anytime something would come up in her life that was stressful, she would just call her mom and tell her mom interesting facts about space, instead of talking about anything. They never talked about anything. And that was really frustrating. That was so frustrating. It is very clear Enid is anxious, depressed, she has PTSD, but I think what bothered me the most is she just wasn't making decisions to help herself. So she realizes all this true crime stuff is making her anxious, yet she continues to consume it. She is in this messy romantic relationship and will just pull away from people and randomly ghost them, but then continues to online date and is like looking for affection, but nothing is serious. Like, she just like keeps putting herself in these really chaotic relationships. And then I think the most frustrating thing is that she just like flat out lied. Like, she just flat out lies to people. And like, that made no sense to me. That just did not compute. So she is on one of her many dates with 2 other women. They're looking for a polyamorous relationship. And the 2 women are talking about their lives and just sharing information about themselves and who they are. And they're like, "Oh my God, like, we're in therapy. Like, are you in therapy?" And Enid's like, "Yeah, totally." And then her inner monologue is like, "I've never been to therapy." And it's like, why would you lie that you're in therapy when you've never been to therapy? Like, I think in the grand scheme of things, like, it doesn't matter if you've been or not, but just like tell people the truth. I think the women she was on the date with would have appreciated that more. I don't understand why she had to lie. And she does that at her job. She is like avoiding a coworker because he's bald, and she's paranoid about him being bald. Like, we just spent so much time in Enid's head, and she just had the same like self-loathing and anxious thoughts like over and over and over again, to the point where it was honestly just exhausting. It was so exhausting. I understand she has a lot of mental health issues, but it just seemed like she was making things worse for herself. And after that 100-page mark, I just didn't care. I didn't care. It lost me. Yeah, I did not like it. I gave it 2 stars. Ultimately, she needs to go to therapy. Like, she needs to work through her shit and talk to people and talk about feelings. And I know that's hard, and I know that sucks, but she was better for it in the end when she finally did. Editing me here. I forgot the weirdest part of Interesting Facts About Space. I'm not done ranting. Enid, this is also funny because I'm on the internet right now, but Enid made YouTube videos when she was in high school or junior high, and as an adult, she will just turn those videos on and almost watch it in like a way to like self-punish. Like, it's so weird. She will just sit there and obsess and watch all of these videos that she used to make and like judge herself about how weird she was and like what she was doing, but she like does it to punish. It was so weird. I'm telling you, it was so weird. I cannot. Okay, I'm done. I have to be done. Let's keep the rant going with As Good as Dead, the third book in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. This is an audiobook, again narrated by a full cast, and wow. Wow. Not a good wow either. This book got me pissed off. I was so pissed. So this whole series is following Pippa, and in the first book we are investigating the murder-suicide of Sal Singh and Auntie Belle. The second book follows a different case, and the third book also has its own case. Pippa has a stalker. She is 3 months out of the events of the second book and is struggling with trauma, PTSD. She starts taking pills to help her sleep. Like, she is very much in a dark, bad place after the events of the second book. All of the things that happen from the first book onward do connect and come together in this third book, but I think what really bothered me is there was a plot point, there was kind of a turning point in the book where there is a choice made, and it did not feel genuine to the Pippa we had known for the first two books. I looked at Goodreads reviews and a lot of people gave this 5 stars. They loved it, but it just felt like the choices that were made were way more difficult than they needed to be. It was so convoluted, so ridiculous. I'm like, this is unrealistic, and I understand it's a book, but like, it also felt unrealistic to the person in the world we had established. Also, I think we really need a follow-up book to see how Pippa's doing in another 5 years, because with how she handled the events between books 2 and 3, I really don't think she's going to cope well with everything that happened in book 3. I think the things that happened are going to follow her for the rest of her life. I think she's going to suffer for the rest of her life, and it's not going to be as satisfying as she thinks it would be, if that makes sense. Like, if you've read the book, hopefully that makes sense. I'm obviously not trying to spoil anything, but like, man, it was such a bummer too, because that book, up until the halfway point, had me so hooked. I was so invested in like binge listening. I couldn't stop. And then there was like a, like, what just happened? Like, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I was so mad when I read that book. I was so mad. And it's not like I can't handle characters doing things you don't like, but it just felt so wrong for her character arc. And it was wild, and it was intense and ridiculous and insane. Could have been avoided, honestly. Wild. I know I'm like very passionate right now. I overall would still recommend this series as an audiobook. It's a very engaging listen. I have enjoyed my experience overall, but dang it, that third book just did not stick the landing for me. Ugh. What a bummer. Okay, up next, The School for Good Mothers. This is not a rant. I really liked this book. This is by Jessamine Chan, and this follows our main character, Frida. Frida is a Chinese-American woman in her late 30s who is mother to a toddler when we meet her. Frida has a very bad day and makes a not great decision that lands her in the School for Good Mothers. We meet Frida when she is struggling taking care of her toddler. Her and her husband had separated shortly after her daughter's birth, and he quickly got remarried to a young 20-something-year-old blonde. Frida was struggling with this, obviously. You're newly postpartum, you have this new baby, your husband just left for some teeny bopper, and you're just like at your wit's end, right? She's trying to work part-time and raise this child all on her own, and things have just accumulated to this very bad day. What happens is Frida leaves her toddler alone for about 2 hours at home. She needs to get something from work. She leaves her baby in like a little, the little seat that rolls around. She leaves her in that and takes off. She was gone for too long when she gets a phone call from the police that they have taken her child. She needs to come to the police station. She jumps through hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop. And the whole reading experience is like quite hopeless and frustrating because we get to see Frida and her inner monologue. You feel like you know her, but she has to defend every thought, every action, every moment, everything she does to Child Protective Services. In this world, Child Protective Services is on steroids. They are insane. Like, the things that they deem good and bad is wild. It's wild. It's so strict. It's so unrealistic. It's very dystopian. It was like watching a train wreck. Like you couldn't not keep reading because you had to figure out what was going to happen next. Frida spends the first year after losing her daughter trying, to get these visits to prove that she's a good mother, to go to therapy, and ultimately she is deemed an unfit mother and is sent to the school for good moms. She has to do this for a year. If she declines, they take away every single parental right and her name is added to a registry. If she wants to buy a car, buy a house, it's gonna flash like, you're a bad mom. So she goes to this school, and this school is also equally frustrating. So there are moms who had some neglect like Frida or abandonment, all the way up to beating their children. But there are other moms who just got put in this school for posting too many negative things on social media about their child. One dad is at the school for good dads because he turned his back and his child fell out of a treehouse. Like the things that you see get these people sent to these schools to rehab them for parents is nuts. There's a part in this book though where things change. Part of their schooling curriculum amps up a notch, and that was when things got really interesting for me. It was such a unique, futuristic, dystopian, aggravating read. I can't imagine what this process would truly be like. I mean, just reading it from Frida's point of view was so frustrating, and just you could feel off the page Frida trying to defend herself in this judgment that was passed by these governing bodies. And it felt so unfair at times. Like, it was such a tough read, but so good. I really liked it. If you want to find out if Frida graduates the School for Good Mothers, you should check this out for yourself. Next up, I want to talk about The Ministry of Time, and this is by Kellyanne Bradley. I am so glad I got to this book. This was so fun. I really liked the story and the writing style and just some of the punches that Bradley delivers. Just some of the twists at the end, things I was not expecting. It was a really great time. This follows our main character who remains unnamed, which I think is really interesting. She's working for the Ministry of Time, and the Ministry of Time has figured out how to bring people from the past into the present. So there are 5 different people plucked from different points in history, brought these people back, and our main character is serving as a bridge, a companion for the next year for her expat, basically is what they're calling them, Commander Graham Gore, who was from 1847, and he was a ship commander on an Antarctic expedition. We get to spend the year with them as he reacclimates to the year 2000 and gets to see different gender roles and technology and music and just ways of living. Obviously, with those two spending so much time together, a relationship develops. There is more happening in the Ministry of Time than you realize. It was so good. There were some really interesting parts with the writing too. So the first one was kind of funny. No one had any idea what traveling through time might do to the human body. So the second reason it was important to pick people who would have died in their own timeline is that they might well die in ours, like a deep sea fish brought up to the beach. Perhaps there were only so many epochs the human system could handle. If they got the temporal equivalent of the bends and sluiced into gray and pink jelly in a ministry laboratory, at least it wouldn't be, statistically speaking, murder. The visual of the bends occurring to the brain, so good. There's also a lot of talk of race and heritage. Her expat Graham Gore, there was no mixed breeding between different ethnicities in the 1800s. You didn't do that. And so for him, it's very unusual to see a black woman, a Cambodian woman, these women of different race in power. And he's like, what the heck? Lots of things happening in this book. There was another paragraph that I really liked. My sister maintained that her work was a sort of reclamation, a space-taking practice and protest of the childhood spent in squeezed spaces, that she was telling the truth, as if the truth was a sort of purifier that turned mud and plasma into clean water by judicious application. I didn't know who read her writing other than the people who already agreed with her. To me, it felt like she had chosen to hang a target around our necks. I didn't understand how anyone could find power in a show of vulnerability. Power was influence, was money, was the person holding the gun. So there's also just a lot of, with that minority thing, a lot of look at power and influence and Like, there just were so many things in here and just so many good little nuggets of writing that I just really liked. So definitely recommend The Ministry of Time. That is it, you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out for some recent reads. I am also working on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I have the last book to get to, so stay tuned for that. I hope you had a great holiday season, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!